Welcome back everyone to the Public Play Space Symposium. Welcome to our speakers. So after a first exciting panel on responsive technologies and playful platforms, we will proceed with the second panel on serious games for the co-design of the public space. Conversation will be opened by Ekim, founder of Play the City Design and Research Network. So Play the City integrates city gaming, digital public polls, interactive learning, co-design and social networks with traditional architecture and urbanism in a bid to create a more open, dynamic city spaces. So welcome, Ekim. We will continue with James Delaney, founder and managing director of Duckworth, the collective of designers, artists, and developers focusing on the use of the video game Minecraft as a design tool. So thanks, James, for joining us. Welcome also to Anthony Duckworth. Through his role at the Australian Urban Design Research Centre at the University of Western Australia, Anthony has developed and applied research to tackle the challenges of growing cities and methods of multi-stakeholders collaboration. So welcome, Anthony, and thanks for joining us. Last but not least, Jessika Weber-Sabil, senior researcher at the Faculty of Digital Entertainment at BUas, focusing on serious games with the topic of tourism systems and experience design, and exploring location-based AR games for experience enhancement. So the panel will be moderated by Chiara Farinea, head of the European project at IAAC, and Celiane Camargo Borges, lecturer and researcher at Breda University. So the floor is yours, and Ekim, you are more than welcome to share your screen.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
Is the screen visible for everyone?
Yes, it is. It's perfect.
Yeah. I first maybe a short note to James. I think this presentation you have seen a week ago or something. So sorry for that. I mean, I think your focus on the research project that you are working on already for a while focuses on public space design. Play the City, occasionally also look at public space design questions, but we are, I think looking at, probably from a single building scale to regional scale through all the scales. So what I want to do is shortly try and introduce what Play the City does, the method, and then afterwards basically share with you a question that we are basically diving in and deeper in the last 2.5, 3 years, and that also concerns connecting to public space, I think public space design. So maybe that can be a connection to the presentations that are coming on later. So I think maybe the big question that we keep asking ourselves at Play the City is how can we help actually urban planning and urban design the way it is, it has been established in the last century, and the questions and the complexity of the questions that are coming towards us, and how can we help the discipline evolve in such a way that not only a single-handed design and planning, but also a method is methods actually, not only a way, but several methods and ways can be looked at to basically bring in expertise, but also local expertise, like also citizens' expertise onto the table, so that the experts as we know it can make and develop plans. And I think this image probably best explains. So you have the hand of Le Corbusier on the one hand, and hands of various, I think in this case, planners, designers, policymakers, different departments of the city of Amsterdam, looking at a area development question and trying to see how they are looking at the same question, and from public space to mobility to climate questions that are coming up, but also, of course, the housing, the pressure that's on the city. How can we actually bring in all different expertise together? And I think the game part of it, Anthony also, I think, has a very clear idea about it, if it's a game or not, you know, like I think you always make the point when you're explaining. And I think the game part of it probably comes, I explained in our book, the Dungeons and Dragons, so it's the closest game that comes to our games. It's basically building stories together. It's building narratives together. And we did not come from gaming world. We were like actually very hardcore theory of architecture, where you look at Christopher Alexander, who is trying to build in an iterative way design practice, where not one top-down design idea dominates everything, but many designers can actually join in a holistic, meaningful design practice. So that, I think, when we were experimenting with that, we have observed how strong it was, the urge, even though we didn't ask to our participants to come up with stories, role play. It's just really naturally how people interact with each other and how they actually bring it in themselves. And then from there on, the idea of play and serious gaming came into the practice itself. And just to give an idea, you see a game for the Metropoolregio Amsterdam metropolitan region of Amsterdam, which is consisting of several municipalities, where local mayors, aldermen joining a game to prioritize their infrastructure investments. And you see how serious, how status what the status is doesn't matter. People really get engaged and start really on their knees making ideas and really taking the role of like, hey, why? As a local mayor, you have to convince others with the strongest arguments you can come, and using the game props and the input that is it's been provided in the game. And from, as I said, from a regional scale to actually single building scale, in this case, where artists of Amsterdam trying to find a location to work in the middle of the real estate crisis. I think this is 2011 or 12 in Amsterdam, where again, actually the same principle applies. Not one idea of an artist or collective of artists who are looking at an area and dominating the plan, but they are in an iterative way, improvising a design where they all finally agree after 3 days of play, in this case. And it can be also, I think, with most of our games are, I think, based in Europe and Istanbul in Turkey, but you see that also if we find the opportunity, we would like to go out and test and implement the game. This is an example from South Africa, where the game entered for half a year and then remained there for 3 years for different questions or for different, let's say, clients, from the city to local land managers to different people that see that how conversations help, which, you know, they are so hungry to, even people with maybe very, let's say, who get the chance to have not so much education, but you know, maybe not even being able to read what's happening there, but still can hold a piece and say, hey, this is my house and I would like to have it over my on top of my shop, because this is how it feels safe on the public space around it. And you see like basic principles of urban design coming back. Doesn't matter the level of education you have when you actually give an interface that is relevant. And that's the same thing if you have a open-minded local politician who really wants the game to facilitate processes where citizens and young workers, in this case from Shenzhen, look at the public space, actually, when rather higher density buildings are entering the area, still to raise their voice to say what is their expectations from public space and the ground floor spaces that's coming up in development in their area. I don't know how many minutes I have still, Marco, but maybe, I think that if you're interested, you can go and see how basically on our website and the book, it's the method is explained in such a way that it's a manual that you can try and apply it yourself. And I think I would like to end actually the question that we have in the last two and a half years with the network of games. Can we actually find a platform or find an ecology of games where not only games that we are developing at Play the City, but also other games and other data sets can actually connect to each other. Of course, public space is one of the layers we are looking at, but also policies around housing, water, mobility, energy, And also, I think when you start, for example, mapping different data sets on housing, let's say, what do you do? What are the strategies and actions to create affordable housing in Western Europe that will probably differ from if it's in South Africa or in Buenos Aires, but the same, the idea is that's why we are opening up the data sets that we have developed so far. So there's also an invitation to other game designers listening. Can we actually find a platform where we can share what we are collecting as information and find a simple way to be able to share and see if we can come up with unexpected or, you know, the combinations that are the various combinations, numerous combinations that can actually try and respond to the complex questions that are coming up towards urban designers. And I think, well, in this case, we are proposing an Excel sheet where we collect all the information. You can download it, I think, if you go to Pakastiswager website and just type network of games, you will see all the links, the app we have developed also for this, and also the data set. See if you can use it yourself, but also if you see, hey, I have a data set about health or about tourism or any other thing, can we see if we can combine it with housing and public space, see if these combinations of data can generate yet a new game to respond to the questions that we are facing. I think Marco, hi, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ekim. Great presentation. So I will now give the word to the next speaker, so to James. James, I don't know if I pronounce correctly your surname. Most probably I don't. So if you can correct me, that would be lovely.
No worries. Yeah, no, I think it was good. And Ekim, I'm sorry, I think you've seen this presentation as well last week.
That's perfect.
But yeah, no, I'm here today to talk about the work I'm doing with a non-profit foundation called Block by Block. And we use the computer game Minecraft as a participatory design tool for co-creating public spaces, predominantly in the Global South, but we're interested in how our methodology can be applied elsewhere. Yeah, as I said, we're really looking at improving public space in urban neighborhoods through the use of video games. For us, I think we've understood the power and importance of Minecraft as one of the world's most popular computer games. It's already sort of internationally recognized. So beyond the sort of project work we do, I think it has great potential to educate and engage a much wider audience in issues around urban planning and public space. The structure of the nonprofit is quite interesting. It's a collaboration between UN Habitat, who are the sort of implementing partners who lend their expertise on the ground, as well as Microsoft and Mojang to sort of technology and gaming companies. So it's quite interesting to have kind of this public space network that's got unusual actors from both sort of architecture and urban design and technology and gaming. You probably know all this, obviously. You know, I think when the foundation started about 8 or 9 years ago, the public space agenda was really not in the field of view of most sort of cities in the Global South. And since then, we've seen a huge change. But that was one of the sort of inspirations for setting up the program, was besides UN Habitat's Global Public Space Program, we really wanted to raise the profile of the public space agenda in the Global South. I think also youth engagement is hugely important to us. There's sort of a certain irony that the cities of tomorrow will be inhabited by today's children, and yet it's those same children who are most often left out of decision-making processes. That's particularly true for Global South cities, which have a much higher proportion of younger city dwellers than elsewhere. The reason why we use Minecraft is it's because it's very accessible, it's very intuitive. Most people can pick it up in sort of half an hour to an hour, even without any sort of computing skills. And it's a really quick and useful tool for sort of not only visualizing their surroundings, but to allow people to adapt and share their thoughts in a three-dimensional format. It's basically like a form of digital Lego. And that simplicity lends itself very well to our processes. I think also the experience of UN Habitat was that more traditional sort of participatory approaches with kind of plans and diagrams and architectural models can often be confusing and very off-putting for people who don't have that training or skills. And so this is also a way of kind of equalizing or democratizing the process by putting everyone sort of on the same level. It's also super important that we're not just delivering individual projects, but we look at the wider impact and we focus on sort of cumulative projects which have a broader impact across kind of policy on national or even global levels. I'll do a quick sort of summary of the methodology and how it works. This has kind of evolved over time, but the key steps really stay the same. So the first is to kind of identify a public space which needs improving or maybe doesn't exist at all, and we model that in Minecraft. So you can see the real space on the top and the Minecraft creation below. We'll then identify the sort of participants of the workshop. It's normally about 30 people, sometimes more. Most of the workshops, we try to include a very broad cross-section of the community to make sure all stakeholders are involved. Sometimes we target specific groups. So we've done projects around the safety of women and girls in Vietnam. We've done sort of projects with refugee camps in Calabar and Nairobi, but also sort of people with disabilities and other groups. We will then organize the workshop, which usually lasts about 3 days. We will then sort of run a crash course in public space design and urban planning, courtesy of UN Habitat, and have a general discussion on kind of the main issues that the community is facing around that space. If time allows, a site visit as well, so they're not just working digitally, but they actually understand the space that we're talking about. And then we teach Minecraft, which, as I said, can normally take sort of up to 2 hours, but most people have it going pretty much within half an hour. It's also quite nice to see younger participants often taking more of an initiative and actually helping sort of older residents get to grips with the technology. It's quite a nice sort of way of breaking down traditional barriers of hierarchy and age group. We'll then split the participants into teams of about 2 to 4 people. It's normally 2 to 4 people to 1 computer, given the technological restrictions of the areas that we're working in. And then the bulk of the workshop is really these groups designing in Minecraft what they want to see in their public space. We have facilitators to kind of help them, quantity surveyors to make sure they're not sort of building aquariums and really impractical and feasible things. But we're actually surprised that most of the time the suggestions are very practical, reasonable and logical. And then, each group will present what they've made, not only to the other workshop participants, but also we make sure we have local stakeholders and decision makers there so that there's some kind of accountability and connection. We'll then sort of create this prioritization matrix, I guess, which looks at all the different Minecraft models the teams have made and the frequency, how often certain ideas occur. And that gives us a really good idea of, as a whole, what the priorities of the community are. All of those ideas are then combined into one Minecraft model, which is then passed over to the architectural designer, who will transpose that model into a sort of traditional architectural design, should we say, which is then built. And all of that is kind of funded and managed in some way by the foundation. So although the Minecraft methodology is sort of one of the main things we offer, that participatory approach, we really like to see projects through from start to finish to the construction of the public space and seeing what effect that has. And then beyond that as well, we're really keen to kind of, obviously advocate for the importance of public space, the importance of participatory design, sort of youth inclusion. And to that end, we're working on several country programs, which work with kind of national governments and ministries to kind of replicate this process, not just in one city, but across a network of cities. So far, we've done over 100 projects in over 30 countries. There's over 1.5 million people who live within a 10-minute walk, I think, of our public spaces. The foundation's raised over $6 million to the sort of global public space program, and we've had over 25,000 people go through our workshops over the years. And these are just some sort of quotes from some projects that we've done, which I think illustrate the value of the methodology quite well. So this was a 12-year-old from Kosovo, and he sort of inspired his community that his idea for a skate park would be most valuable. We actually returned to the site 5 years after the workshop, and it was interesting to see the same sort of 4 or 5 kids who were really passionate and sort of engaged in the process were still there using the public space. And if I had more time, we've got a great kind of video which shows seeing them sort of age 12 and age 18 still sort of enthusiastic and passionate about their space. And I think that's one of the most important things, is making sure that the community feels a sense of ownership and pride of these spaces. Because long after we've gone, there is still a kind of a maintenance cost. There still has to be a continued community interest in the space. We can't just go in and leave and expect everything to be done. You know, public spaces are changing, evolving, and they need constant attention. Obviously, during COVID, I think the health aspect of public spaces has been brought to life more than ever. And you know, working in Bangladesh with several workshops, we were able to sort of provide, you know, greener spaces, cleaner air, clean water, and that's something that's been incredibly important over the last year and a half with the pandemic. I think also conflict resolution is a really interesting thing. There's something about video games, that Minecraft in particular, that people are maybe less tense, they're less on edge, they're in a more kind of open or playful frame of mind. And this project on the Gaza Strip really actually helped to bring sort of Israeli and Palestinian participants together and work through a lot of the sort of conflicts and tensions that exist between those two communities. And then finally, I think, as I mentioned before, the educational impact that these processes can have on kids, really inspiring them to consider careers in planning and architecture, which they might not have previously thought of. You know, a simple game like Minecraft really might get children thinking for the first time in terms of 3D and, you know, their urban environment and cities. And I think that's a really, really powerful part of our process that's worth mentioning. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the other talks and the discussion.
Thank you very much, James. Great to see also a radically different approach to the topic of serious games and playful interaction for the co-design, but looking forward, of course, to the debate later on to discuss about those different approaches. So now I give the word to Anthony Duckworth. Anthony, whenever you want, you can share your presentation.
Thank you. I'll just send this through. How is that?
Still, we cannot see.
Ah, interesting. It's bound to happen, right? Because I'm on the other side.
Are you maybe using two screens? Is it possible?
I am.
Probably these might create some troubles.
Okay, bear with me.
Still no. Tell us whenever you share. But no worries. Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay. We see
the PowerPoint now.
Yeah, it's somehow cut. We cannot see the okay. Now it's perfect. So now, you can put it full screen if you can, and that's. Now we can see your notes.
Okay, bear with me. Apologies.
No worries. This is the normal Zoom
sort of
Zoom thing. It's our new reality. So looking forward to the moment when we will be all together in one place.
It's a dramatic start to my presentation. Hey?
I think that this way it's perfect. We can even watch it in this way, because unless you have very small text, it's fine also in this way, as you prefer.
If you can see that, then that's fine. We should be able to read it. Okay, yeah. Thank you. I'll start rather than taking up too much more time. Firstly, apologies to Ekim, because this is a very similar presentation as well. So hopefully I put a couple of extra slides in just to keep you awake. But I really just appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much. I just want to talk a little bit about where we are, what our context is, and then I will actually just show you a couple of case studies of some of the work that we've been doing, because I haven't really been in this forum before, so I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you. So my affiliations are with the Australian Urban Design Research Centre and also the University of Western Australia, and Fairplace, which is the company which I practice under. So just to give you a quick context, I'm currently sitting on the western edge of a great continent, and I'm in a city called Perth, which is right on the west coast of Western Australia. It's a city which is 100% highly livable according to some metrics, depending on what metrics you like looking at, but it's also a city which is highly unsustainable, which has an enormous footprint, both in terms of geographical footprint and its carbon footprint. So I guess Perth is like a microcosm of a unsustainable, sprawling city. And that is the kind of context that we operate in. We're often trying to address sustainability issues around how to arrest urban sprawl. So I just wanted to clear that up, because that's the kind of context that we have. We have unbounded cities which continue in a kind of sort of what we call a greedy pattern of land consumption, because there's no actual boundaries to the cities. And this is typical of a lot of North American and Australian cities which have significant greenhouse gas emissions. So in terms of the work we do, and this is nothing new, I know you're well across this, but you know, we have a very top-down planning system, and we often engage with our stakeholders and our communities, but we don't get them involved. And that difference between engagement and involvement is something that we're very interested in. So starting to share the power in decision-making is something we are trying to do to arrest these kind of business as usual approaches that happen in all our urban planning and design and have these negative outcomes. So we're very interested in collaborative decision making. And I know when I said, and when Ekim pointed out that we don't use the word games, it is about this idea of bringing people together to make decisions rather than the decisions themselves. So the impacts of actually just getting the people together is what is important, I find, in our work. And this is some of our projects here that we've been working on. But also the power of collaborative decision making, I suppose. We're sort of now interested in how that impacts urban dynamics. So what is the point of getting people together? Why do we think that's a good idea? What are the kind of outcomes that will help us impact the socio-ecological system towards sustainable ends? So we're in a process of now trying to understand how our work fits in this system, working with system dynamics engineers that we're fortunate enough to work with. So we know it's important, we know it's good, but now we're trying to articulate that a little bit better. So just to quickly talk about some of the reasons and the principles behind our work before I show you some case studies. I guess, obviously, participation is a key principle. We're trying to open up a process which is often opaque to certain parts of society. Involvement is a term which requires power sharing and democratization. And inclusion means, as James was talking about, how do we actually just get as many people as possible who are interested in this process to be engaged? And the methods we use, and James really interested in the digital kind of Minecraft elements. We're on the other side, probably more with Ekim in terms of tactile, interactive play, using scale as a way to get people to understand urban spaces in urban planning and design decision making. The way we design our props and we spend so much time thinking about the design in terms of how they look, how they feel. Can people approach them? Can they touch them? Will they want to touch them? And then again, not talking about game as a game, but talking about game dynamics. So the idea of sequencing, steps, rewards, integrating those kinds of elements, but having open-ended. It's always about exploration. There is no winner. I don't know if, you know, there's no contract at the end of the day. So people feel free to explore and invent. And the most important part is getting together to talk about what we've done. That is when the trust building happens. So these are really important elements that we focus and we keep coming back to in all our designs. And I think the other thing is in terms of some of the things that you've articulated, James, and I know, Ekim, you've constantly been talking about this work and the benefits of what we do. But I guess that idea that we can discover new things from collaborative work, that we can translate people's knowledge into action a lot better. So people are custodians of knowledge. They don't necessarily know how to translate that into a decision-making process. Aligning different groups of people, that's quite self-explanatory. We want to make decisions. We want to get consensus. But this idea, again, of just building capacity in our communities and our stakeholders to continually engage in this process and not just being one-off projects, but building a sort of level of understanding in society. And then, as James pointed out, people who become caretakers and custodians of projects, it's not just about, well, we finished, but it's about, okay, let's make sure this is something that endures and we fall in love with it in many ways. So our work now is to try and document how we are performing against these outcomes. And that's the research that's currently underway in our practice. So just to show you some case studies, we start with the suburb, the scale of the suburb. That was our first inquiry. And these, I'm just going to run through these really quickly. We've moved into the city in higher density, but again, building scale and neighborhood scale. Then we moved into public space, and that's probably where this becomes interesting in terms of streets, parks, and how we sort of get people engaged in the discussion around understanding that roads are public spaces. People still have a very concept that roads are for cars, so it's about, you know, transitioning these into public spaces. We've worked on kind of precinct scale, which is where a lot of our work is now, and precinct has a strong link to sustainability in terms of being able to make positive changes at that scale, you know, district scale batteries, heating, cooling, those kinds of initiatives. And also what we have worked outside of Australia into Africa and the US as well, looking at city regions. That was in Uganda, where we did some really interesting work on a rapidly developing city. I would love to go into that case study, but we probably don't have time. But in terms of democratizing a very hierarchical decision-making process, we worked with an anthropologist who documented the workshops, and there was just a fascinating restructuring of power balance in decision-making in that community, which was just happening before his very eyes after working in Uganda for 20 years, and he was very, very excited. So I guess that idea of democratization, involvement in decision-making for the future is one of those outcomes there. And then also operationalizing our work now from analog into digital. So trying to communicate between rapid prototyping and digital performance of urban spaces. Can we do that real time? Can we do it within the confines of a workshop? As you all know, this work, we often have limited time for this work in engagement work. You're often part of a project process. So we're constantly trying to elbow our way in to get more space and time within projects and policies. So that's always a tension I find with this work in terms of being able to, people to appreciate its value, particularly in our region where it's quite new. I guess even though participatory design has been around, you know, forever, but it's certainly since the 1970s, it's sort of something that still people are reluctant to share power. And it's something that we have to constantly argue for in terms of the value of what we're doing. But in terms of public space, bringing it back, I think we find that the local authorities are really interested in shifting mindsets around what is public space, what is the future of public space, particularly in the this kind of rapidly changing conceptions of public space that we have at the moment. It's a very exciting time. So there seems to be great potential to explore alternative forms and structures of public space using these kinds of methodologies at this time. I think, is that long enough? Or I don't want to go on too long, but hopefully that was clear. There was a lot of work, I know, in a very short space of time, but thank you very much for listening and enduring it, if that was the case.
Anthony, thank you very much for such an insightful and intense presentation. No, but it was really great. So thank you very much for sharing your work with us. Looking forward to the conversation at the end of this panel. So now I'm really delighted to give the word to Jessika Weber-Sabil. Jessika, thank you very much for joining the panel. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me for today's symposium. I'm just sharing my presentation. Just make sure to get the right one. Okay.
Yeah, we can see.
Full screen? Yeah, is it full screen?
Now, perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I'm also working at the Breda University of Applied Sciences together with Nick and Delaney, and I'm coming from the actually tourism side of approaching games. So I'm neither an urban planner nor an architect, but I'm looking into how urban spaces could actually be used for tourists and equally also for residents, and make it a livable and equally a visitable place, because there's a lot of discussions going on in tourism planning, and you've probably followed it also on the news. There's a lot of discussions about over-tourism before COVID. So, and for this case, we have developed a game which is called the Smart City Tourism Hospitality game, SCITHOS. It's a serious game, which is a board game, and coming out of a research project I was involved in a couple of years ago. So it's already finished, but we are still playing it, and we have also played it in the open game event here at the Public Play Spaces here in Breda. So the project actually was aiming to support policy makers and other stakeholders like tourism decision makers, DMOs, transportation groups, to develop different tools and to gain insights to get deeper reflections on sustainable urban tourism planning. Because there are a lot of issues coming with tourism, because they're working and using the same facilities, let's say museums, theaters, public transportation, public spaces, where it's not always seen as a positive thing, because there are too many tourists on the one hand side, but also the quality and the type of tourists often causes a disturbance for many cities. Among our partners were also Model University and Worldline and Vestlandsforsøk in Norway, and together we developed this project. Even though it's been finished, we continue on it with a business model and further explore it. So among the partners, we also played the game in 6 different cities, and the cities approached us in the framework of the project, coming with different questions. So for instance, we had Belgrade, one of the eastern cities in the project, which has a really well-developed riverside, huge external investments. I think they came from Russia and from the Middle East. So there was a lots of investments going on, lots of money pumped into the city. And of course, they had lots of tourists being equally interested in the cultural heritage of that city. But actually a little bit lesser known and lesser visited city. And Belgrade doesn't suffer from over-tourism just yet. So we had Darmstadt as well, a smaller city, more concerned about development and innovation in Germany, but they also during that time applied for the UNESCO World Heritage, because there was a really well-known quarter about art and cultural heritage. So they wanted to connect that quarter to the inner city center. So they had a lot of like urban planning question for that game. And of course, Amsterdam. You all know the difficulties of Amsterdam back then. Yeah, 2019, suffering from lots of over tourism, high pressure, lots of party tourists coming into the city, and people moving out of the city because it kind of became really unbearable and really expensive because of lots of Airbnb also exploiting in the city, where Amsterdam, of course, has implemented some policies currently. Gothenburg, another city which actually is really industrial. So there's a lot of industrial investments. Volvo is also sitting there. So there's a really social divide in that city going on. It's mostly known for events, but people are staying in the city maybe 1 or 2 days and then going out and exploring the nature of Sweden. Valencia, more in the south, really high quality of livability, well known for its event and business tourism, because they have a lot of convention centers and of course big museums, so good connection to the sea. So it's a little bit of a spread, and the destination management was telling us when we did play there that they didn't suffer from over-tourism, but of course they didn't want to do the same mistakes as Barcelona or Amsterdam or Dubrovnik and end up with the same questions of being overwhelmed by too many tourists. And Stavanger is changing the industry from oil industry to tourism. So they welcomed a lot of cruise tourism, and with cruise tourism, they come a lot of daytime visitors into the city, which don't leave a lot of money because they just go for shopping and for restaurants, but they don't stay there. So that's also a really big question of how do we deal with an influx of temporary tourists, which almost when a ship unloads is double the size of actually Stavanger. So a lot of different questions we were faced with from our partners. And one of the main questions, of course, how did we avoid over tourism like in Amsterdam? And of course, after COVID or during COVID, there's still the question of, we don't want to go back to an over tourism situation as we have experiences in 2019, which was really the peak. So switching between a situation of too many tourists to absolutely non-tourists, where people, the residents nowadays enjoy the city, and I think Ekim can tell a little bit more about that because she's living there. Is a big question for tourism planning. How do we restart? And how do we restart in a safe way? And how can we avoid the problems and the mistakes we have already done so many years beforehand? So there's a lot of questions coming from the tourism planners, municipalities, to do it in a more sustainable way. So the challenges really for the DMOs are in the moment, so the DMO standing for Destination Management Organization. Sometimes it's called marketing organizations, but they're shifting from marketing towards management. And the European City Marketing Organization, so the head association from all of the European cities has also seen that we actually need to manage the capacities and the quality from the cities. So it's an increasing challenge around growth. There's a changing paradigm shift because of the digital transformation, of course, and sustainable practices. And we need to envision a new future for tourism. So of course, the city is really, really complex, and there's a lot of things going on apart from urban planning. And tourism system is a part of this. So we really would like to understand, like, how can we bring the complexity of a city into a game? And I make it a little bit quick because I see the time ticking. We used the triple bottle 9, People, Planet, Profit. We named it a little bit different, but that's the baseline of our model. And we extended it to livability and visitability, which then kind of like brings the metaphor of a waterbed. If you have a focus too much on economy, then probably the natural viability, the ecology will suffer. So that was our starting point for the game. And of course, we cannot enclose or put in all of the complexity of a city in a game. So we focused on a few key performance indicators and parameters. And as also Ekim, James, and Anthony were saying, our approach was really much participative, collaborative. You see on the left side the board, which was really flexible. So it was made out of hexagons, and we can configure the board to any city we will play in. And then we have small miniatures, which are 3D cut at the moment. And these facilities could represent, for instance, museums and theaters. And the players, they either play a new facility, so they place a new facility and build new facilities in the city, or they do interventions in forms of policy cards, for instance. Marketing the city towards a specific target group, for instance, like cultural heritage tourists. And then the players see a dashboard, which you see on the right side, which shows them the different indicators on their performance. So whatever they have done in the city will be shown.
We have just 1 minute before.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Marco. Will be shown in the dashboard, so they can obviously see if they have done and played towards a scenario which they envisioned, or if the system says, well, you actually need to do a little bit more. Normally, a city round or play session is half a day. That was the play session from the open game event, where we played with the municipality of Breda and some students. It was really nice to be outside. And yeah, normally we have a really good feedback, where, as the other speakers were saying, it's a really good tool to facilitate collaboration, engagement, and actually get to know other stakeholders, because often they don't know each other so much. So yes, that's from my side. I was running through. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jessika, also for sharing your expertise and your work with us. You were asking, how do we start? How do we start with tourism? But in general, how do we start now that it seems that we can go back to a new, different kind of reality? I'm really happy to give the word now to Chiara and Celiane for the conversation, just reminding to all the participants that they can share their questions in the Q&A tab below here in Zoom. So feel free to write there, and we will be happy to share your questions. Chiara.
Great, thanks, Marco. I will start with a question open to our participants. So, in panelists, in this session we have seen several community-based projects, and we saw also protocols of implementation of these projects, from the very early stage to the continuous engagement, as Anthony was underlying, to the data gathering, as Ekim was showing, or to the implementation, as in the Minecraft example. So what I would like to ask as a first question is, within this very complex process of implementation, which are the main challenges? So if you can share with us which are the moments of this process that you find the more challenging, and maybe also some examples of strategies that you find out towards these challenges. So maybe I would start with the first panelist, Ekim.
I think that, thank you, Chiara. Maybe Anthony mentioned a little bit, the processes that you become part of as a city game. I think that it's really important to realize which part, like what sort of process you are entering or you're being part of. I think maybe public space design is rather, more controllable timeline. And if you have rather larger project timelines that concerns maybe 5 to 10 years, that's a complete different process that you're in as a game. And also I think what Anthony was saying, it really all comes down to sharing power, right? You can have a wonderful co-creation sessions, city games, whatever methods you can name, and there are really higher quality methods that are working. But I think it doesn't matter what sort of method are you using, it also really depends on what sort of political process you're part of, what sort of planning regime you're part of, and how serious the decision makers, politicians that you are collaborating with in terms of implementing the outcomes of your methods. So I think we have seen it in the last 10 years, and as Play the City, I think we have seen quite a bit from being from the very early part of a process towards the implementation. Of course, I think one thing is important to realize, which is as I said, the scale. If you are working on a rather small building scale or public space design, it's rather easier to have the control. And if you're talking about the area development where, I don't know, 10 or more hectare areas being planned with large developers, city governments and housing corporations, etc., you have to then, I think, rather be conscious of the complexity of the process and try and see if you can pitch your project or pitch your method into a longer term engagement. You don't just go and run a beautiful session and you cannot just hit and run in a process like that. You have to argue yourself into a whole process so you can be part of it, you can monitor it, you can give input whenever necessary, because those processes are also super complex. They face various, financial crises, partners leaving it, new elections, etc. There are so many things that are affecting them. And as a game, I think you rather negotiate yourself into a position that you become a longer term partner. Otherwise, you will have zero impact. You still will have impact. I think that's also another thing, because decision making in such processes are so complex. It's important that also people who are in the process are in a different conversation than in a normal, project contract process, and that they actually learn together. They change their mind sometimes. The judgments change, the ideas, the values are exchanged. So a game really helps to that. But I think just to be aware of what sort of process you are in, what sort of politician is behind it, what are the intentions, and then just realize you can be sometimes used not in the way that you would like to be used. So it's good to understand, I think, beforehand when you're entering. And I think we have learned also as Play the City, sometimes we just say, okay, it's rather, we just don't want, we just don't want to be a part of this process because we see other things that we realize. So I think that's it's part of the responsibility or the consciousness of the designer, I think, in the end.
Thanks a lot for sharing this experience and these insights. So maybe anyone else that would like to
can I just add to that, because I think, Ekim, you've hit the nail on the head when every situation is different, and the biggest challenge is being able to read the motivations and the kind of power dynamics of a decision-making environment. And that is something that unfortunately comes through a lot of experience. Like you have to be able to sort of situate yourself within a group of a power structure, and like I said, you have to kind of elbow your way in a little bit, but you do it gently. So I find that one of the early real challenges of participatory work is the extent to which people want you to be there. Like they might say they want you to be there, but the extent to which they genuinely want the power sharing to happen and even it occurs in really unlikely places. So sometimes people who you think will be open to the process and not. So reading, what we might say, reading the room is a really important challenge of any project, because if you don't get that right at the start, you tend to be constantly changing. But I don't want to take up too much time, but also we often change our game, if you like, or our dynamics. It has to be flexible, has to be adaptable. You can't have an end state in mind, because I find that often that will change throughout the course of a process of engagement. So for yourself, remaining flexible and open is really important as well. So not getting too much in love with your projects and being able to, what we say, kill your darlings if you have to, you know.
Great. Great. Maybe I will leave the floor to Céline.
Okay, thank you. We don't have much time, which is a shame, as I'd like to congratulate all the presenters and such interesting projects and processes, and I have like hundreds of questions. I will try to summarize in a general one, and to any of you who would like to answer. So my background is psychology, and in the old times when I used to work as a social psychologist in communities, I used to work with dialogue and collaborative processes for decision-making, for democratic decision-making. And in the early days, we would work with role plays, and our props would be like any pillows available around the room to become a character or stakeholders. And it's so fascinating to see how sophisticated it became with technology. And still, I think it was James who said technology is used as a catalyst. So to me, technology is a medium, so it's not the end. It's still to create what you were talking about, more participatory processes. Anthony talks about power sharing. And my question is, how can you work around power relations, participation, inclusion, and also culture and context when designing for this play and games? And what makes me asking this question is when I see like James bringing the Minecraft, which was developed in the global north, to the global south, to Africa. How do you do this bridge? So when Anthony talks about setting the stage and designing the game for the participants, do you involve and engage the participants in designing what you want them to see, or do you create together with them what they're gonna be playing? So how do you deal with these challenges of creating a truly participatory processes that can be inclusive and more democratic? Thank you. For any one of you who would like to share some insights.
James, do you want to go?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think my answer's mostly been covered. I think it is the main challenge we face is around not kind of social engineering, but relationship managing and difficult stakeholders. I say also in the methodology that I presented, there was one point where I said we take the sort of community made plan and an architect kind of draws it up. That point often has the risk of going badly wrong. And I think making sure that the professional or the architect or designer or whoever it is part of the community consultation process is really important. So you don't have a disconnect between, you can have a great participatory workshop, but then what is delivered on the ground, which is, what we're here for, is something that doesn't represent that. So making sure that connection is super important. And I think, really interesting to think about working in different cultural contexts. It's interesting, most of the places that we do our workshops, no one really knows about Minecraft. Minecraft is huge in the global north. It has massive audiences in Europe and North America, but not really in Africa, Southeast Asia. So I think we've been surprised actually at how open stakeholders are. It's almost been easier to do these kinds of projects in the global south than in the global north. And it might be something to do with kind of the bureaucracy and framework of planning in the global north and the hesitancy of sort of urban design professionals to have this kind of very radical democratic process. That almost isn't so much of a challenge where we normally work, which is an interesting observation. But yeah.
Just add something which is just silly, and thank you so much. Great question. And yeah, I'm sort of sometimes worried that the aesthetic codes that we imprint into our props are kind of biased, and it's something that we're conscious of, but I would love to involve more communities in the design of those. But again, as Ekim said, it gets back to time and things like that.
Just a quick one on that as well. That's a really difficult problem for us because we're using Minecraft, a pre-built video game built out of blocks. If we're talking about disabled design where you need ramps, that's something that Minecraft is just not built to have. So we have to often work around the aesthetics that are built into the game that might sort of bias certain design decisions, but it's a really interesting problem.
Thank you. Chiara, I think we need to close the session.
Yep.
Marco, thank you.
Thank you all. Actually, if the keynote speakers still have some moments to exceed, just asking, obviously, just if you're available. We have an interesting question from the participants, from Kelly. So I don't know if we can take just 1 minute to answer to this, if anyone. Kelly's asking if during the design process of the game or tools, usually how clear you anticipate the ways that data collected with the tools are being applied on the design problem. You can find it in your Q&A. I don't know if any of the participants, of the speakers, wants to answer to this question.
It's a really difficult question, I think, Marco, but I try to give an answer. I think it's really important to understand the context in which the game is being played. So not only to talk to your main contact partner, which for us in the game was a destination management organization, but also to different stakeholders beforehand, to understand like what are their urgent questions for the city. And then, yeah, incorporate these, the data or also the questions accordingly in the game, which is not always, possible because there are so many questions that, you can actually design 20 games for one city. So at one point you have to make a decision, and that's the prioritizing. Which is really important then. Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica. So basically, let's say that, I mean, there are some expectations about the data collected. A good project probably can always surprise you, but it's also true that it's needed to narrow down. I don't know if anyone else of the speakers wants to continue. Okay, so maybe it's time to close. So thank you very much to all the speakers. Thanks to Chiara and Celiana. It was a great time, a great conversation. And thanks also to all the participants who are being so active and present and growing throughout these hours. So now we are going to have 10 minutes of break, and then we will continue with the following panel that it's on gamification, play, and community-based strategies. So stay connected. We see you in 10 minutes. And at 1:15. So thanks again to all the speakers. See you in a few moments.